Welcome to this journey through one of the most perplexing disappearances in American history. Not of a person, but of an entire organization that may have numbered in the hundreds. Tell us where you're watching from now, because this story will challenge everything you think you know about how thoroughly something can be erased from existence. And it will leave you questioning what other secrets might be, hiding in plain sight within the archives of forgotten history. We're about to delve into a mystery that spans from the glittering ballrooms of Manhattan to the coal-stained valleys of Pennsylvania, where a group of intellectuals, industrialists, and artists formed a society so secretive, so methodically organized, that when they chose to disappear, they succeeded almost completely. Their legacy is so thoroughly erased that only fragments remain. A half-burned ledger, a series of architectural symbols carved into buildings that no longer exist, and the haunted recollections of a single dying man who broke his vow of silence in 1954. It was the year 1923. The Great War had ended 5 years prior, leaving America transformed. The Roaring Twenties were in full swing, jazz echoed through speakeasies, flappers danced in defiance of Victorian morality, and Prohibition had created an entire underground economy of illegal alcohol and organized crime. The stock market was soaring, fortunes were being made overnight. Technology was advancing at a pace that felt almost supernatural to those who remembered the horse and buggy era. Radio broadcasts connected the nation. Motion pictures were becoming an art form, and in the shadows of this rapid modernization, some believed that humanity was moving too fast, forgetting ancient wisdom, abandoning traditions that had kept civilization stable for millennia. In the industrial heart of Pennsylvania, specifically in the city of Pittsburgh, the situation was even more dramatic. Steel mills belched smoke 24 hours a day, turning the sky perpetually gray. Immigrant workers flooded into cramped tenement buildings. Labor strikes erupted with violent frequency. The gap between the industrialist elite and the working poor had never been wider. And it was here, in this crucible of American capitalism and social upheaval, that something strange began to emerge. They called themselves the Architects of Silence. The name itself is disputed, found only in a single newspaper article from 1927 that was itself retracted the following day. Some researchers believe they may have used different names in different cities. Others suggest the name was intentionally misleading, a false trail for anyone who might come looking. What we know for certain is this. Beginning sometime around 1921 or 1922, a group of influential individuals began meeting in secret. Their gatherings left almost no paper trail. Their membership lists were never recorded in any public document. And yet, over the course of approximately 5 years, they accumulated significant wealth, influenced major architectural projects across 3 states, and then, without warning, without explanation, they vanished. Not just the organization. The people themselves seemed to scatter to the winds, and within 2 decades it was as if the Architects of Silence had never existed at all. This is their story. Or at least what little of it can still be pieced together from the fragments they left behind. Pittsburgh in the 1920s was a city of contrasts, so stark they seemed to exist in different centuries, simultaneously, on the hilltops overlooking the 3 rivers, the Allegheny, the Monongahela, and the Ohio. Mansions sprawled across manicured estates. These were the homes of the steel barons, the coal magnates, the railroad tycoons who had built their fortunes on the backs of immigrant labor and the natural resources pulled from Pennsylvania's earth. Their houses were monuments to Gilded Age excess, ballrooms with crystal chandeliers imported from Europe, libraries paneled in exotic woods, wine cellars stocked with illegal French champagne that somehow flowed freely despite prohibition. Below, in the valleys choked with industrial smoke, a different world existed entirely. The mills operated in perpetual twilight. Even at noon, the sun struggled to penetrate the thick haze of coal smoke and steel furnace emissions that hung over the working-class neighborhoods. Men emerged from 12-hour shifts covered in soot and metal dust, their lungs slowly filling with particles that would kill many of them before they reached 50. Their wives took in laundry or piecework sewing, trying to stretch wages that barely covered rent and food. Children played in streets where the very air tasted of sulfur and iron. This was the landscape where the Architects of Silence first emerged. The earliest confirmed reference to the group comes from the private diary of Margaret Holloway, a socialite and amateur anthropologist who moved in Pittsburgh's elite circles. Her entry from March 15, 1923 is brief but tantalizing. Attended another of Caldwell's peculiar gatherings this evening. The usual crowd, though I noticed several new faces, including a man who claimed to be an architect from Philadelphia, though Thomas says no one by that name is registered with any architectural society. They spoke in circles about preserving essential knowledge and building monuments to silence. I confess I understand little of their philosophy, though the intensity in the room was palpable. James has forbidden me from attending future meetings. He says there's something unwholesome about the whole affair. Margaret Holloway would attend 2 more such gatherings before her diary entries on the subject ceased entirely. She never mentioned them again, and when interviewed in 1948 by a researcher investigating Pittsburgh's social history, she claimed to have no memory of any group by that description. But who was Caldwell? Jonathan Caldwell was a professor of classical architecture at the Carnegie Technical Schools, now Carnegie Mellon University. Born in 1879 to a wealthy Boston family, he had studied at Oxford and traveled extensively through Greece, Egypt, and the Middle East before settling in Pittsburgh in 1919. He was known for his eccentric theories about architectural symbolism and his belief that ancient builders had encoded secret knowledge into the very structures they created. His lectures drew small but devoted followings, Students described him as magnetic but unsettling, a man who could speak for hours about the mathematical relationships between pyramids and temples, about geometric patterns that appeared across cultures separated by thousands of miles, about knowledge that had been systematically suppressed or forgotten by modern civilization. Professor Caldwell believed that humanity was in danger of losing something essential, recalled a former student in a 1956 interview. He thought that industrialization and modern life were severing our connection to ancient wisdom. He used to say that we were building a Tower of Babel out of steel and electricity, and that we would face the same fate as the original builders: confusion, fragmentation, the loss of a universal language. This philosophy resonated with a particular type of person in 1920s Pittsburgh. The war had shattered many people's faith in progress. The industrial slaughter of trench warfare, the poison gas, the machine guns mowing down thousands in minutes, all of this had revealed that technology could just as easily destroy as create. Some intellectuals and artists had begun questioning whether Western civilization was on the right path at all. The spiritualist movement was experiencing a revival, with seances and mediums claiming to contact the dead. Theosophy and other esoteric philosophies gained popularity among educated elites, searching for meaning beyond materialism. Into this uncertain cultural moment stepped the architects of silence. They began meeting in various locations throughout Pittsburgh and nearby cities, sometimes in Caldwell's own home, a Victorian mansion in the Shadyside neighborhood with a library that reportedly contained thousands of rare books on architecture, mysticism, and ancient civilizations. Other times in the back rooms of private clubs or in rented spaces that were used only once and then abandoned. The meetings followed a ritual structure. According to the few fragmentary accounts that survive, attendees would arrive after dark, often through back entrances or side doors. They wore ordinary evening attire, suits and dresses appropriate for any social gathering of the period. But once inside, certain procedures were followed. No names were used during the meetings. Members addressed each other by titles: the builder, the scribe, the guardian, the keeper of measures. These titles seemed to relate to specific roles within the organization, though what those roles entailed remains unclear. The meetings centered on lectures and discussions. Caldwell or other learned members would present on topics ranging from sacred geometry to the symbolism of ancient Egyptian temples to theories about lost civilizations. But these weren't merely academic discussions. The group believed they were preserving knowledge that was in danger of being lost forever in the modern age. They created detailed records, drawings, diagrams, a vast archive of what they considered essential wisdom. And they planned something larger. According to a fragmentary letter discovered in 1967 in the archives of a demolished Pittsburgh bank, the architects of silence were financing the construction of monuments, buildings that would encode their preserved knowledge in architectural form. These structures would be built throughout Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia, creating a network of interconnected symbolic sites that future generations could decode if they possessed the proper keys. "We are building a library without words," the letter stated. "When language fails, when records burn, when memory fades, the stones will remember. The geometry will endure. Those who come after will find what we have hidden in plain sight, if they are wise enough to see." This ambition required significant financial resources, and this is where the story takes a darker turn. Between 1923 and 1927, several wealthy individuals connected to Pittsburgh's industrial elite died under circumstances that raised questions, though these questions were never officially investigated, and newspaper coverage of the deaths was minimal and quickly forgotten. October 1924. Thomas Garrett, a steel mill owner worth an estimated $3 million, failed to appear at a scheduled board meeting. His wife reported him missing that evening when he didn't return home from what she believed was a business trip to Philadelphia. Police conducted a routine investigation. Garrett's automobile was found parked at Union Station, but there was no record of him boarding any train. His luggage was discovered in a hotel room he'd rented under a false name, but Garrett himself had vanished. 3 days later, his body was pulled from the Monongahela River. The official cause of death was listed as accidental drowning, likely due to intoxication. Garrett had a known fondness for bootleg whiskey, and the coroner noted a high level of alcohol in his system. The case was closed. His widow inherited his fortune and retreated from public life. But there were anomalies that went unreported in the newspapers. Garrett's business partner, Edward Moss, later confided to a friend, this conversation was recorded in a letter that surfaced decades later, that Garrett had become obsessed with mystical nonsense in the months before his death. He had been donating large sums to some kind of secret society, and had talked about building something that would outlast the mills, outlast the money, outlast memory itself. More tellingly, Garrett's hotel room, rented under the name James Silence, contained books on Egyptian architecture and a notebook filled with geometric diagrams. These items were not mentioned in any police report and apparently disappeared from evidence storage shortly. After his death, Thomas Garrett had been a member of the Architects of Silence. The pattern would repeat. December 1924. Catherine Aldridge, a wealthy widow and art patron, died in a house fire that destroyed her Squirrel Hill mansion. The fire started in her private study, where she kept her most valuable books and papers. Everything was reduced to ash. The fire was ruled accidental, likely a fallen oil lamp. But neighbors reported seeing multiple figures leaving the house just before flames became visible, and Catherine's own servants insisted she had gone to Philadelphia days before and shouldn't have been home at all. March 1925, Robert Henshaw, an architect who had worked on several prominent Pittsburgh buildings, suffered a fatal heart attack in his office. He was 42 years old with no history of heart problems. His current projects included renovations to 3 churches and a mysterious private commission that he had described to colleagues as the most important work of my life, plans for a building that would contain multitudes within its geometry. After his death, no record of this commission could be found. His office had been thoroughly cleaned out, and his personal papers were gone. June 1925. Helen Pritchard, a librarian and linguist, drowned while swimming alone at a private lake house. She was an expert swimmer and the lake was calm that day. Her death was ruled accidental. Her family later discovered that she had recently withdrawn several $1,000s from her savings account, money that was never recovered. Among her belongings was a half-finished translation of an obscure medieval Arabic text on mathematical mysticism. The original manuscript she had been working from could not be located. 4 deaths in 8 months. All wealthy or educated individuals, all connected, however tenuously, to architectural, mystical, or preservationist pursuits, all ruled accidental or natural, and all, as researchers would eventually discover, members of the Architects of Silence. But in 1925, no one was connecting these dots. The deaths occurred in different jurisdictions, were handled by different police departments, and received only brief newspaper coverage. Pittsburgh was a violent city in the Prohibition era. Murders, industrial accidents, and suspicious deaths were common enough that 4 apparently unrelated fatalities among the upper classes barely registered. The first person to sense a pattern was a journalist named Samuel Brennan. The investigation begins. Brennan worked for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, covering crime and city politics. He was 34 years old, cynical, perpetually rumpled, with the permanent squint of someone who'd spent too many hours reading by dim light. He drank too much coffee and too much illegal gin, and he had an instinct for stories that didn't quite add up. In July 1925, Brennan attended the funeral of Helen Pritchard. He'd known her slightly. She had occasionally helped him research historical background for stories, and he went partly out of respect and partly because he had nothing better to do on a Wednesday afternoon. At the funeral, he noticed something odd. Standing apart from the family and Helen's colleagues from the library was a group of approximately 20 people who seemed to know each other but didn't interact with anyone else. They were well-dressed, respectful, but there was something off about them. They watched the proceedings with an intensity that went beyond normal grief. And when the service ended, they departed quickly without speaking to Helen's family or offering condolences. Brennan's reporter instincts kicked in. He followed them. The group walked 3 blocks to a restaurant called Giovanni's, entered through a side door, and disappeared into a private room on the 2nd floor. Brennan positioned himself at the bar with a view of the stairs and waited. 2 hours later, the group emerged, still silent, and dispersed in different directions. Brennan didn't know what he'd witnessed, but he knew it was worth investigating. He began digging into Helen Pritchard's life. He learned about the withdrawn money, the mysterious translation work, the unusual people she'd been meeting with in the months before her death. He discovered that she had attended gatherings at Jonathan Caldwell's home, and when he looked into Caldwell, he found references to the other deaths: the steel magnate, the widow, the architect, all of whom had some connection to the professor and his peculiar circle. Brennan spent months on this investigation, working on it between his regular assignments, slowly piecing together fragments. He interviewed Caldwell's former students, tracked down people who had attended the mysterious gatherings, examined property records and financial transactions. A picture began to emerge of a sophisticated organization, with serious financial backing and ambitious goals related to architectural projects. But he could never quite pin down specifics. People he tried to interview suddenly developed amnesia about the whole affair. Records disappeared. Leads went cold. And Brennan began to notice that he was being followed. Men in dark suits appeared in his peripheral vision. The same automobiles seemed to park outside his apartment building. His mail arrived opened and clumsily resealed. Someone broke into his office at the newspaper. Nothing was stolen, but his notes on the architect's investigation had been disturbed. Photographed, perhaps. Brennan grew paranoid. He started keeping duplicate notes in different locations. He confided in his editor, Martin, who urged him to drop the story. "You're chasing ghosts," Martin said. "Rich people and their weird hobby clubs." It's not news, but Brennan couldn't let it go. In January 1927, he finally published his story. The article appeared on page 6 of the Post-Gazette under the headline, "Secret Society Linked to Mysterious Deaths." It was carefully worded, avoiding direct accusations, but it laid out the pattern of deaths, the connections to Jonathan Caldwell, and the existence of what Brennan called a secretive group of wealthy intellectuals pursuing obscure architectural and mystical studies. The article named the Architects of Silence for the first time in print. The reaction was swift and devastating. Within 24 hours, the newspaper received threats of lawsuits from several prominent families. Jonathan Caldwell's lawyer sent a letter demanding retraction and threatening a libel suit. The mayor's office called the newspaper's publisher directly to complain. And pressure came from sources that Martin, the editor, wouldn't even identify to Brennan. The next day's edition carried a retraction. The article had contained numerous factual errors and unfounded speculation. The retraction stated, "The newspaper apologized to all parties mentioned. Brennan was suspended without pay for 2 weeks. And when he returned to work, he discovered that all his research notes, years of investigation, had vanished from his office and from the 2 off-site locations where he'd hidden copies. Someone had been thorough. Worse, when he tried to contact the sources he'd interviewed, he found that several had left Pittsburgh abruptly. Others claimed to have no memory of speaking with him. One, a former student of Caldwell's who had provided crucial information, was found dead in his apartment of an apparent morphine overdose, though the man had no history of drug use. Brennan was terrified. He stopped investigating. He never wrote about the Architects of Silence again. And in 1929 he left Pittsburgh entirely, moving to Cleveland where he took a job as a copy editor and spent the remaining 30 years of his career writing nothing more controversial than weather reports. But his investigation, brief and curtailed though it was, had consequences. It forced the Architects of Silence to accelerate their plans. During the years 1923 through 1927, at least 7 buildings were constructed in Pittsburgh, Ohio, and West Virginia that bear the architectural signatures researchers would later associate with the Architects of Silence. These weren't secret structures hidden in forests or caves. They were ordinary buildings in plain sight: churches, libraries, office buildings, even a bank. But they shared certain characteristics that suggested a common design philosophy. Each building incorporated geometric patterns based on ancient proportions. The golden ratio, Fibonacci sequences, mathematical relationships found in Egyptian pyramids and Greek temples. Doorways were positioned at specific angles. Windows followed patterns that seemed arbitrary until analyzed mathematically. Stone carvings appeared to be purely decorative, but contained symbols that appeared across multiple structures, suggesting a kind of architectural language. The most elaborate example was the Meridian Building in downtown Pittsburgh, constructed in 1926, supposedly as the headquarters for a mining company. The Meridian Building was a 6-story structure that appeared conventional from the outside, typical commercial architecture of the era: red brick with limestone trim, large windows for natural light. But its internal geometry was extraordinary. The main lobby was octagonal, with floor tiles arranged in a spiral pattern that drew the eye toward the center of the room. 8 corridors radiated from the lobby at precise angles. The ceiling was decorated with a mural depicting what appeared to be a star map, though astronomers who later examined it couldn't identify which portion of the actual sky it represented. On the top floor, accessible only through a private elevator, was a circular room with no apparent purpose. It had no office furniture, no decorations, nothing but bare walls and a domed ceiling inlaid with mathematical formulas in metal that caught and reflected light in calculated patterns. The room's acoustics were remarkable. A whisper from one specific point could be heard clearly from another point across the room, while normal conversation remained inaudible. Standing in the center of the room produced a subtle echo that some visitors described as harmonic or unsettling. The architect of record for the Meridian Building was Robert Henshaw, the same architect who had died of a heart attack in March 1925. The building had been completed more than a year after his death. Who had finished his work? Who had interpreted his plans? The mining company that commissioned the building, Allegheny Consolidated Resources, existed only on paper. Its listed officers were names that led nowhere. The building was financed through a web of shell companies and private investors whose identities were never revealed. Within 2 years of its completion, the Meridian Building was sold to a real mining company. The circular room on the top floor was converted into storage space. The elaborate mural in the lobby was painted over during a renovation. The building's secrets, if they were secrets, were hidden beneath layers of mundane commercial use. This pattern repeated across all 7 structures. They were built, used briefly for mysterious purposes, and then absorbed into ordinary city life, their original intentions buried, forgotten, normalized. By late 1927, the construction phase seemed complete. The Architects of Silence had built their monuments, and then they began to disappear. It happened gradually, then all at once. Jonathan Caldwell left Pittsburgh in September 1927, supposedly to take a position at a university in California. He sold his Shadyside mansion to a banker and auctioned off most of his extensive library. Students who visited him during his final weeks in Pittsburgh described him as distracted, almost euphoric. He said he had completed the work of a lifetime, one recalled. He said knowledge had been preserved, that the future was secure, that we had built something that couldn't be destroyed. Caldwell boarded a train to California on September 17, 1927. He never arrived. The train completed its journey without incident, but Jonathan Caldwell was not among the passengers who disembarked. His luggage was found in his compartment, neatly packed but unopened. The conductor couldn't remember seeing him after the train left Chicago. No one reported seeing him leave the train at any intermediate stop. He had simply ceased to exist somewhere between Illinois and California. Police investigated. The railroad company investigated. But no trace of Caldwell was ever found. This was just the beginning. Over the next 18 months, dozens of people connected to the Architects of Silence vanished, died, or relocated far from Pittsburgh under mysterious circumstances. It was as if the entire organization had decided to dissolve itself, and its members were scattering across the country or off the face of the earth. Margaret Holloway, the socialite who had written about attending their meetings, moved to France with her husband and never returned. She lived another 40 years but never spoke publicly about her time in Pittsburgh. Edward Moss, the business partner of the drowned steel magnate, died in a car accident in West Virginia in 1928. His vehicle went off a mountain road on a clear day with good visibility. His family claimed he had been receiving threatening letters, but these were never produced as evidence, one by one. The members of the Architects of Silence disappeared from public life. Some left obvious trails, obituaries, property sales, forwarding addresses. Others simply vanished. Census records, city directories, membership rolls of clubs and organizations all showed a systematic removal of certain names, as if someone was going through archives and erasing evidence of specific individuals' existence, and the organization itself left no trace. There were no incorporation papers, no bank accounts, no meeting minutes, no membership lists. The Architects of Silence had operated entirely through informal networks and cash transactions, leaving almost nothing to connect its members or prove its existence. By 1929, the investigation that Samuel Brennan had started was effectively dead. The reporter had been silenced. The witnesses had scattered. The physical evidence had been destroyed or hidden. And Pittsburgh moved on, too busy with the booming stock market and the approach of a new decade to care about a conspiracy theory involving rich people and mystical architecture. Then came the Great Depression. The stock market crashed in October 1929. Banks failed. Fortunes evaporated. Pittsburgh steel mills cut production and laid off thousands of workers. The Roaring Twenties gave way to breadlines and unemployment. And in the chaos and suffering of the Depression years, whatever remained of the Architects of Silence seemed irrelevant, a strange footnote from more prosperous times. The 7 buildings they had constructed remained, gradually blending into the urban landscape. The Meridian building changed hands several times, served as office space for various companies, survived the Depression and 2 world wars. The circular room on the top floor was forgotten, used occasionally for storage or left empty. The other 6 structures had similar fates. They were just buildings. Nothing special. No one remembered what they might have represented. And for more than 2 decades, the story of the Architects of Silence seemed finished. Until 1954. Harold Montgomery was dying. 78 years old. Suffering from emphysema and heart disease. Confined to a hospital bed in Scranton, Pennsylvania, he had perhaps weeks to live. He had no close family. His wife had died in 1945, his only son in the war, and he faced death alone except for the nurses who checked on him and the occasional visit from his lawyer. In August 1954, Montgomery asked his lawyer to contact a historian at the University of Pittsburgh. The historian, Dr. Elizabeth Chen, specialized in Pennsylvania's industrial era. She had never heard of Harold Montgomery, but the lawyer's call intrigued her. Montgomery claimed to have information about a historical society in Pittsburgh in the 1920s that might be of academic Interest. Dr. Chen visited Montgomery on August 19, 1954. She brought a notebook and a tape recorder. What Montgomery told her over the course of 6 hours, recorded on 4 reels of magnetic tape, was the only comprehensive insider account of the Architects of Silence ever documented. Harold Montgomery had been a banker. In 1923, he was 37 years old, working for Pittsburgh National Bank, handling accounts for wealthy clients. Through this work, he met Jonathan Caldwell, who came to him seeking advice on managing funds for a private research society. Caldwell was charismatic, brilliant, convincing. He described a vision of preserving ancient knowledge through architectural encoding, of building structures that would outlast paper and digital records, of creating a network of monuments that future generations could decode when modern civilization inevitably collapsed. He believed that industrial society was unsustainable, Montgomery told Dr. Chen, his voice rasping on the recording. He thought we were using up the Earth's resources, that we were building toward catastrophe, that within a century or two everything we took for granted would fail. And when it did, he wanted knowledge to survive. Real knowledge. Mathematical principles. Architectural wisdom. The kind of understanding that built the pyramids and Gothic cathedrals. Montgomery joined the Architects of Silence in early 1924. Over the next 3 years, he helped manage the organization's finances, facilitated property purchases, and handled the complex transactions needed to fund their building projects while maintaining secrecy. He attended meetings, participated in their rituals, studied their philosophy, and he witnessed what happened when some members wanted to leave. Not everyone was committed, Montgomery said. Some joined because it was fashionable, or because they wanted to be part of something elite and secret. But Caldwell and the core members, maybe a dozen people, they were true believers. They had invested everything into this project. And when people tried to quit, when they threatened to talk about what we were doing, those people didn't remain problems for long. Dr. Chen stopped him there. Are you saying that the Architects of Silence killed members who tried to leave? Montgomery was silent for a long moment. Then, I'm saying that people who knew too much, who might expose the organization before the work was complete, tended to have accidents. The steel magnate who drowned, Thomas Garrett, he had threatened to go to authorities about financial irregularities. He thought we were some kind of fraud. The widow who died in the fire, Catherine Aldridge, she had started talking to a priest about the group, expressing doubts about whether our activities were moral. Robert Henshaw, the architect, he wanted credit for his designs. He wanted to publish papers about the mathematical principles we were encoding. That was unacceptable. So they were murdered. I don't know who carried out the axe, Montgomery said. I wasn't part of that inner circle. But I saw the pattern. I understood what was happening. And I said nothing because I was afraid I would be next. He coughed, a rattling sound. The nurse appeared on the recording offering water. When Montgomery continued, his voice was weaker but more urgent. In 1927, Caldwell called a final meeting. All the core members were there, perhaps 40 people. He said the work was complete. The monuments were built. The knowledge was preserved. But now came the dangerous part, ensuring that no one could trace the organization or its activities. We needed to disappear completely. Caldwell had planned everything. Members would leave Pittsburgh over a period of months, staggered so as not to draw attention. They would relocate to different parts of the country, assume new identities if necessary, and never contact each other again. All records would be destroyed. All financial trails would be erased. The organization would cease to exist. Some members objected. They had invested years in this project and wanted to see it through, wanted to create keys or guides that would help future generations decode the buildings. Caldwell refused. He said that if the knowledge couldn't be decoded by intelligent people of the future, then it wasn't worth preserving, Montgomery recalled. The buildings themselves were the only key. Anyone clever enough to understand the geometry would find what we had hidden. There was another reason for the complete erasure. Though Montgomery only understood this later, the Architects of Silence had broken laws. They had committed fraud in their financial dealings, used intimidation and possibly murder to maintain secrecy, and evaded taxes on the funds they had moved through shell companies. If authorities ever fully investigated the organization, many members would face criminal prosecution. Better to disappear entirely. I left Pittsburgh in December 1927, Montgomery said. Changed my name. Moved to Scranton. Started a new life. I've never spoken about any of this until now. Why now? Dr. Chen asked. Because I'm dying. And because I need to tell someone the truth. Those people who died, Garrett, Aldridge, Henshaw, the others, they were murdered by their fellow members of the Architects of Silence. Jonathan Caldwell orchestrated it, or at least permitted it. I was part of an organization that killed to protect its secrets, and I said nothing for 27 years. The recording continued for another hour. Montgomery provided names, dates, financial details, descriptions of meetings and rituals. He drew diagrams from memory showing the geometric patterns used in the buildings. He explained the philosophy behind the architectural encoding, how mathematical ratios, astronomical alignments, and symbolic carvings were supposed to preserve knowledge for future civilizations. But when Dr. Chen asked the obvious question, where is Jonathan Caldwell now? Is he still alive? Montgomery had no answer. I don't know. After he left Pittsburgh in 1927, I never heard from him or about him again. He vanished more completely than anyone. For all I know, he changed his identity so thoroughly that he lived out his life as someone else entirely. Or perhaps the organization's inner circle decided he knew too much. And they did to him what they'd done to the others. There's no way to know. Harold Montgomery died on August 31, 1954. 12 days after his confession to Dr. Chen, Dr. Chen spent the next several months trying to verify his story. She found census records confirming Montgomery's move to Scranton and name change. She found property records for the 7 buildings Montgomery had described. She located the retracted newspaper article from 1927. She even managed to track down one other former member, a woman in her 70s living in Oregon, who confirmed that she had attended meetings of a study group in Pittsburgh in the 1920s, but refused to provide any details. Dr. Chen published a scholarly article in 1956 titled Esoteric Architecture and Secret Societies in Post-War America. It mentioned the Architects of Silence briefly, along with several other similar organizations, treating them all as examples of upper-class fascination with mysticism during the 1920s. The article generated no interest and was largely forgotten. The tape recordings of Montgomery's confession sat in the University of Pittsburgh archives, uncatalogued and unheard for 40 years. Today, 6 of the 7 buildings constructed by the Architects of Silence still stand. The Meridian building in downtown Pittsburgh was demolished in 1987 to make way for a modern office tower. During demolition, workers discovered that the circular room on the top floor had metal plates embedded in its walls containing what appeared to be mathematical formulas or perhaps musical notation. No one could definitively determine which. The plates were salvaged and are now housed in Pittsburgh's History Center, labeled simply as architectural curiosities from the 1920s. The other 6 buildings remain in use. A church in Wheeling, West Virginia, a library in Columbus, Ohio, an office building in Erie, Pennsylvania, 2 residential buildings in Pittsburgh's East End, and a former bank in Youngstown, Ohio, now converted into apartments. None of these buildings advertise their connection to the Architects of Silence. Most people who work in or visit them have no idea of their supposed hidden meanings. They are simply old buildings, relics of 1920s architecture, charming in their way but unremarkable. And yet, in 2003, a graduate student in mathematics at Carnegie Mellon University wrote a thesis analyzing the geometric patterns in these buildings. She demonstrated that they shared mathematical relationships that were extremely unlikely to be coincidental. Floor plans, window placements, the angles of corridors, all incorporated ratios found in ancient structures from Egypt, Greece, and Central America. She concluded that the buildings were indeed designed according to some unified philosophical system, though what that system meant or what knowledge it was supposed to preserve remained unclear. Her thesis won several academic awards but generated Little interest outside mathematics and architecture departments. In 2011, an amateur historian published a self-funded book titled The Architecture of Secrets, Pittsburgh's Hidden History. The book devoted an entire chapter to the architects of silence, compiling Montgomery's testimony, Samuel Brennan's original article, and architectural analysis of the surviving buildings. The book sold fewer than 300 copies and is now out of print. The question that haunts researchers who have studied this case is simple. Was any of it real? Did the architects of silence actually encode meaningful knowledge into their buildings? Or was the entire project the delusion of educated people who had convinced themselves they were preserving civilization when they were really just playing elaborate games? Montgomery believed the knowledge was real. Caldwell certainly believed it. But belief doesn't equal truth. Several researchers have attempted to decode the building's supposed hidden meanings. They've measured angles, analyzed mathematical relationships, searched for astronomical alignments, examined every carving and symbol. Some claim to have found patterns. Others insist there's nothing there beyond the normal variations of 1920s architecture. The truth may be unknowable. Perhaps Caldwell and his followers succeeded in encoding knowledge so subtle, so sophisticated, that no one in the century since has been clever enough to decode it. Perhaps the buildings contain nothing but the fantasies of people who desperately wanted to believe they were doing something important, or perhaps, and this is the most unsettling possibility, the knowledge is there waiting, and humanity simply isn't ready to understand it yet. The greatest mystery of the architects of silence is the fate of its founder, Jonathan. Caldwell boarded a train in Pittsburgh in September 1927 and vanished somewhere during the journey west. No body was ever found. No confirmed sighting after Chicago. No death certificate, no burial record, no final trace. 3 theories have emerged over the decades. The first, Caldwell died on that train journey, either by suicide or murder by his fellow members, and his body was disposed of so thoroughly that no evidence remained. This theory suggests that the organization's inner circle decided Caldwell himself had become too dangerous. He knew everything, could identify everyone, could potentially compromise the entire project if he ever spoke, so they eliminated him as they had eliminated others who knew too much. The second theory, Caldwell successfully assumed a new identity and lived out his life as someone else entirely. He might have died decades later. Perhaps he's buried in some cemetery under a false name, his true history lost forever. This theory has a certain appealing symmetry, the architect of erasure erasing himself so completely that even his death left no trace. The third theory is the most disturbing. Caldwell never intended to go to California at all. The train ticket, the luggage, the disappearance, all were staged. He went somewhere else entirely, somewhere he had been planning to go all along. And wherever that was, he took with him the true keys to decoding the buildings, the comprehensive understanding of what the architects of silence had actually achieved. In 1963, a man named John Caldwell died in a nursing home in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He was elderly, perhaps in his 80s, suffering from dementia. He had no identification, no family, no records prior to 1945 when he had appeared in Santa Fe claiming to be a retired teacher from the Midwest. His belongings included a worn leather journal filled with geometric diagrams and mathematical notations that meant nothing to the nurses who sorted through them after his death. The journal was thrown away. Was this John Caldwell actually Jonathan Caldwell? There's no way to know. The timeline works, he would have been the right age. Santa Fe would have been an appropriate choice for a man interested in ancient architectural traditions, with its blend of Native American and Spanish colonial influences. And the geometric diagram suggests someone with Caldwell's interests and knowledge. But it's also entirely possible that John Caldwell was exactly who he claimed to be, a retired teacher with an amateur interest in mathematics, no connection to Pittsburgh or the architects of silence. Just one of thousands of elderly men who died alone and unremembered in nursing homes across America. The mystery remains unsolved. The modern legacy in recent years, The Architects of Silence has experienced a small revival of interest, not among historians or architects, but among conspiracy theorists and online communities fascinated by secret societies. Forums dedicated to hidden knowledge and suppressed history have seized on the story as proof of various theories that ancient wisdom is being systematically concealed, that powerful groups operate in the shadows, that buildings encode secrets the public isn't meant to understand. These interpretations would likely horrify Jonathan Caldwell and his followers, who saw themselves not as conspirators but as preservationists, not as occultists but as scholars trying to bridge ancient and modern understanding. But this is the fate of all secret societies once their secrecy is breached. The void of unknowing fills with speculation, and speculation metastasizes into mythology. The truth about the Architects of Silence is probably more mundane and more tragic than the legends suggest. They were educated people frightened by the pace of change in their world, convinced that something essential was being lost in the rush toward modernity. They believed they could preserve knowledge through architecture. They committed crimes to protect their project. And when they realized that their grand vision had produced nothing they could verify, when they understood that their encoded buildings might contain no more meaning than any other buildings, they erased themselves rather than face the possibility that they had wasted years and money and lived on an elaborate delusion, or perhaps they succeeded beyond imagining, and we simply lack the wisdom to see what they created. Both possibilities are equally plausible. Both are equally disturbing. The story of the Architects of Silence remains a disturbing reminder that the desire to preserve knowledge can become as destructive as the desire to suppress it. In their attempt to save wisdom for the future, Caldwell and his followers became what they feared: destroyers of memory, erasers of truth, silencers of voices that questioned their vision. But questions remain, as they always do with stories like this. Were the buildings truly encoded with knowledge, or were they monuments to self-deception? Did Jonathan Caldwell die on that train in 1927? Or did he live another 4 decades under a false name, taking his secrets to the grave? Were the deaths of organization members truly murders? Or have researchers imposed a sinister pattern on random tragedies? And most importantly, if there is knowledge hidden in those 6 surviving buildings, what might it contain? And would we recognize it if we found it? To this day, the buildings stand. The church in Wheeling, where light falls through windows at specific angles on the solstices. The library in Columbus, where the arrangement of shelves creates acoustic properties that some visitors describe as unsettling. The residential buildings in Pittsburgh, where tenants occasionally report dreams of geometric patterns and mathematical sequences. Are these genuine phenomena related to the building's design? Or are they the power of suggestion, the mind finding meaning where none exists? And on certain nights, when researchers pore over the archived testimony of Harold Montgomery, when mathematicians analyze the ratios embedded in century-old floor plans, when someone stumbles across Samuel Brennan's retracted newspaper article and begins asking questions, on those nights, in the archives and libraries where this history is preserved, people sometimes report an uncanny feeling, a sense of being watched, a whisper of something just beyond comprehension. The Architects of Silence erase themselves so thoroughly that their absence has become its own kind of presence. Their silence speaks louder than any testimony they might have left. And perhaps that was the point all along, to create a mystery so perfect, so complete, that even the absence of answers becomes a kind of answer. If this journey through one of history's most meticulously erased organizations has moved you, if you find yourself looking at old buildings with new eyes and wondering what secrets might hide in their geometry, then consider subscribing to the Untold Hour. There are many more stories waiting to be told, mysteries buried not in caves or wilderness, but in plain sight, in the architecture and institutions and forgotten corners of civilized life. Leave a like if this account has made you question whether erasure is ever truly complete, whether silence can ever be absolute, whether the past can truly disappear or if it only transforms into something harder to recognize. And comment sharing your thoughts. Can knowledge truly be encoded in stone and mathematics? Or is the search for hidden meaning just another way we comfort ourselves against the chaos of existence? Until next time, remember, the most effective secrets are the ones that erase themselves, and the most enduring monuments are the ones whose purposes have been forgotten.